Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Kathy Scabetta from Adobe with a wonderful presentation on everyday headshots. And for this great and relevant topic, we have an amazing headshot photographer, a long time friend of Adobe, Photoshop guru, Lightroom guru. She's been a professional retoucher. She's got a headshot business. She is absolutely the perfect person to teach this topic, and we'll spend the next hour teaching us everything that she knows about this topic that she can convey in just 1 hour. If you have questions, please throw them in the chat pod and we'll get Christina to answer them throughout this presentation. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Christina. Thanks so much for being here, the people watching, and for you, Christina.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here like always. It's so nice to come and just hang out with like-minded people. And yes, everyday headshots is absolutely a great topic given my two areas of expertise, right? Headshot photography and Photoshop and Lightroom. And so today what we're going to be talking about is we're going to spend the beginning portion of the class on some of my tips for natural light, maybe a little bit of an augmented natural light headshots. What can you do basically if you need to improve on the headshot that you currently have for for your next Zoom meeting or something like that. So that's what we're going to start with for the front end, and I'm going to show you some before and after examples on posing and on adding some fill light and everything like that. And then we are going to move over and we're going to talk a little bit about retouching portraits in Lightroom, not Lightroom Classic, because we're all on the go, we're all on the run, especially me with two children under 3. And so a lot of the time, all I have in front of me is a tablet, and I don't have a chance to be sitting down at my computer because I have little, very fast children running around. So what I need is a way to edit portraits and headshots fast and efficiently, but still using the same fabulous software that Lightroom has created, and that's why they have created Lightroom. And so when I talk about Lightroom, I'm going to be talking about the mobile platform, and when I talk about Lightroom Classic, that's going to be the Lightroom on our computers that we're all familiar with. So a lot to cover, but I'm excited to be here with you. And why don't I just switch on over into my Lightroom Classic to talk about the shooting section of this. I do want to thank Adobe for the opportunity to have this class and to talk about it. So so we're just going to start with some of our headshot stuff. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to just start off with some of my shooting tips. And so whenever possible, what I look for when I'm shooting is soft directional light. And so what this means is it means a very, very large light source that's going to be my primary light source. And you can see here in a couple of the images that primary light source is this big set of double doors that I have lighting Angenieux. And then what I've done is I've actually added a little bit of a fill light down here. And that fill light, like you can see right there, is just going to be brightening up those shadow areas. So I have the key light, which is our main primary light source. And then we have our fill. And let me show you what the difference is between the two of them. So we have 2 photos of Angenieux here. And the one on the left, you can see that we do not have any light filling in the shadow areas. And the best place that you can see this is under the nose. and under the chin, the jawline, but also you can see it in the reflection of the light sources in her irises as well. And so over here on this side, you can see that we do have a little bit more fill, and that lightens the shadow under the chin, it lightens the shadow under the nose, and then it adds a lot more dimension in the irises themselves. And so that is going to be my first tip. So using directional light, oh, hold on 1 second. We're going to be using directional light that is soft. And you can see from this image that I don't have any actual direct sunlight hitting the face of my model. And that's really important because it's very rare that direct sunlight and headshots are going
Hey,
to—
Christina,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what happened, but we are just seeing a white screen. We're not seeing any of your images.
Oh, no. Okay.
You may want to stop sharing and maybe try to come back.
Okay, let me try that. I'm going to stop sharing. Let's do this again. And I'm just going to show my whole desktop and let's see if that fixes the problem. Can you guys see this now? Can you see my images now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. So, so we have our key light. We have our primary light source, and then we have a little bit of fill light. And just in case we didn't see the images from before, I'll just go back and show you the without the fill light and the with the fill light. It's very subtle, but I think that it's just enough to really add vibrance to those irises so you can see the light on the bottom. And then you can also see how under the chin, the shadow, and under the nose, the shadow are softened when you add a fill light into your image. So that's just a little bit of a recap of what I just said. So a couple more BTS. You can see here that I am outside actually shooting in. And then here, right here is that fill light illuminating the shadow areas of Anjanée's face. Okay, so that's just a little bit of the behind the scenes for that shoot. And again, no direct sunlight. Just direct sunlight is definitely not going to get you the kind of images that you want. And also stay away from contrasty backgrounds. And one way we can see that is in this photo session that I did for Blair. He came in and he's moving to Atlanta to do some acting, and I think he might be joining us today. Hopefully he is. Hi Blair. But he was nice enough to allow us to use his headshot session for the image that we're going to edit today in Lightroom. And so you can see here that we have a couple different lights going on, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about what we have going on here. And I'll just show you. Here is the final image from that session that I just shot. And there are a couple of things that I want to point out during this photo session. If we go back to the behind the scenes video, you can see that I actually have no fill reflector on the bottom. And the reason why I don't have anything actually modifying the fill is because I don't need it. Let me zoom in here. This is a zoomed in image of Blair's eyes, and I think it really speaks to what's going on and what's illuminating Blair's face. The first thing that's illuminating Blair's face is the area here from the outside of the parking lot. You can see, if I go back to the videos, you can see that we are just right at the edge of a parking lot, and I have sat him right under the shadow area. Remember how I said no direct sun? This is a perfect example of that because I've literally sat him as close to the direct sun as possible without it actually shining on his face. And so the other thing that is important here is that I'm actually bouncing some light, some strobe light, on to the ceiling up here, you can see here, we have our, this is just adding to the key light. So it's bouncing off the ceiling and then it's adding some light onto the butterfly areas of Blair's face. And then the background, in the background behind Blair, we actually have the rim light. And so I'll bring up a couple additional shots from that lighting setup. So you can see that we have really dynamic irises because we have all of the reflections going on in those irises. And then we have a really nice rim light that's just illuminating the side of Blair's face. The other thing that I want to point your attention to is the background. Let's go with non-contrasty, non-bright backgrounds. And the reason why I say that is because the objective of a headshot is to make a connection with the person in the photo. And if we're going to do that, the easiest way to do that is by removing all of the distractions that you can in camera. And so because we were dealing with ambient light, I did have my camera set to high speed sync. So these ProPhoto B1s are actually set to high speed sync to allow me to balance the strobe and the ambient light. But I just want to head back and look at the reflections. The reason why I did not have a bounce reflector or a fill reflector is because the actual ground right here is doing that for me. It's literally bright enough that it's bouncing up and it's adding a lot of fill onto Blair's shadow areas. So I didn't really need fill in this situation. And so that's just a couple of my shooting tips for, having a good headshot. The last thing that I want to mention is that it doesn't necessarily cost a lot. You can see here that I wasn't even using a reflector for this shot with Blair. And then I also want to show you, if you do not have a reflector that you're working with and you just have to make something work, you can easily get a trifold presenter from your local Staples, or even even a pharmacy like a CVS would have it, or a giant grocery store. This is literally a trifold reflector and aluminum foil taped over it. So you don't need a bunch of expensive gear to make a great headshot. What you need is something that's going to bounce the light to fill in those shadow areas. So I've given you 3 examples. This is going to be the first way to bounce the light. The second way to bounce the light is to actually invest in something like a scrim that we see here. And then adding a light underneath that scrim. So that's the second way. But then the third way is, if you don't have either of those things, picking your location the best way possible. Lining up your subject so that they're right on that direct sun line, but they're still in the shade, and getting that bounce from the organic materials that are around you during your shoot. So there's 3 easy ways to make your headshot look a little bit better from just right out of the camera type of images. The second thing that I want to point out, which I think is really important, is going to be posture. And when I sit with my clients, I tell them that posture is actually rule 1, 2, and 3. And I tell them that the more uncomfortable they feel, the better their headshots are going to look. And so if I bring up these photos of Valencia, you can see that in the first one, there's no posture coaching that's been done whatsoever. But in the second image, you can see how I have her sitting up really nice and straight. I have her stretching her neck all the way up, and then pushing her chin out towards camera slightly. And then the other thing that you want to remember, and I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen for just a moment. I'm going to go back to my video for this. Oh, I'm unable to start my video. Okay. So the other thing, oh, start my video. Yay. Okay, so there's just a live demo that I wanted to show you. When you're dealing with a lens, whether it's a camera lens on your actual computer or a lens on your camera, one of the things that a lens does is it's going to make the things closest to the camera look largest and the things furthest away from the camera look smallest. So if I have my dirty hand, I don't know what's on my hand, but it's dirty. If I have my hand up closest to the camera lens, you can see how much larger my hand is than my actual face. But we all know that the actual size of my hand is closer to this hand over here and not this hand over here. So if we have, especially a client that comes in that's a little bit weight conscious, or they want to look as pleasing as possible, anybody really, what you can do is you can actually ask your clients to, instead of lean back away from camera where the body and the head relationship are different, you can actually ask them to lean towards camera. And what that's doing is it's actually making the relationship of the size between the head and the body much more pleasing for your subjects. And all that is tilting, tilting the view of your camera. You could also get a stool and you could stand on a little bit of a stool slightly above. And that's going to really create this pleasing effect that is going to help your clients or your friends just love their headshots that much more. And it's going to make for a really happy person at the end of your headshot session. And they are definitely going to love the photos that much more. So at this point, what I want to do is I want to switch over so that we can actually talk about how to edit our photos once the photos are taken. Can everybody, actually before we do that, let's pause for some questions, because I know I covered quite a bit in the first 20 minutes. So let's pause for some questions about posing, about working with people, anything that there is in that kind of realm. What have we got?
Right now we have no questions. So if you guys have some questions, throw them in chat real quick and we'll cover them. If not, we can continue and cover any questions toward the end. But right now we don't have any. You've been super clear.
Okay, good. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is I would like to import my files. And so I'm going to use a photo of Blair to edit. And one very helpful app that I would like to recommend for any Canon shooters out there is going to be the Canon Camera Connect app if you have an iPhone or an iPad. And that's what I'm using today for this example. Anytime you see the red dot, that's basically where my finger is. So, so I can show you where to tap and how to edit. All right, so the first thing we want to do is I have already moved the raw files of my headshot session with Blair over to my iPad, to my photos. So I'm going to choose to import right down here in the bottom right. You can see import, and I'm going to choose to import from camera roll. That's going to bring up all the photos in my camera roll. Now, importantly, the reason why I do not have all of my photos sync in is because I don't want, random photos, that look weird. I don't want them in my camera roll. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the images of Blair and I'm going to choose add, and that's going to add them to my Lightroom. So this will take just a moment.
Christina, some questions came in when you have a moment.
Oh, yay. Yeah.
Want to cover them now?
Yeah.
So Tony asked, what is a good color for a background?
Oh my gosh. Interesting. It's going to be different for every person, right? Sometimes you can go with a complementary color to whatever the person is wearing. Sometimes you can just stick with just straight white. And we're talking like sheet backgrounds, right? The paper seamless backgrounds that you can purchase. That's kind of what I'm talking about now. But to be honest, most of my headshots that I do are really outdoors. And the biggest rule for outdoor backgrounds is going to be what the biggest rule for outdoor backgrounds is what is not going to take away from the color, from the subject in the headshot. I think that's the most important rule. It doesn't necessarily matter what color it is. It just matters that it's a little bit darker and it really helps the viewer's eye focus in on the face in the headshot. And I think that's kind of the most important thing.
Great, thank you. Question, what is your recommendation on the light positioning with regard to the face?
Well, when it comes to the light positioning, I'm just gonna come back to my camera for a minute because I'm just gonna use my flashlight on my phone and we can talk about it. I'm gonna stop sharing and, okay, my video is up. Good. All right, so I got my phone, just turning on my flashlight. When it comes to light, the best place that you want to place the light is going to be kind of above the face and pointed down at the subject. What you don't want is you don't want villain lighting. And what do I mean by villain lighting? Villain lighting is lighting from below, okay? You could see, wow, don't I look like a Disney character? Okay, so what you don't want is that. And the reason why I say it's important not to do villain lighting is I think it's something that sometimes happens when you're first starting out for headshots. And what people will do is they will actually take the sun that's extremely bright and shining down from the sky, and they will use the brightest side of a reflector. So let's see. I have my reflector here. Good thing I'm in the studio. So I have my reflector here, but sometimes if you get a reflector, it will come with multiple sides. So some beginner photographers might take this extremely shiny gold side and put it on the reflector, and they will actually bounce more light back at the face from the underside than is going on from the top. And when that happens, you're going to end up with the area under the chin and under the nose and under the eyebrows. You're going to end up with that area brighter than your key light. And your key light should be hitting you this way, from up slightly and straight on towards camera. That's the way that I usually light my subjects. So good thing we were in the studio. That's, you just want to stay away from the brightest light source being pointed from below at your subject. That's a good one.
All right. Do you use manual or aperture priority when you're shooting?
I usually use manual mode, and light is going to fluctuate because the light isn't as bright when it's behind a cloud, obviously. So that would be the only time when it would fluctuate and I might switch over to aperture, but 99% of the time I'm on manual. And any of those changes, I'm actually fixing in Photoshop or fixing in Lightroom.
All right, couple more questions and then we'll move on. Do you prefer, for diffusers, parabolic or an octabox, and why?
So, like a parabolic umbrella.
Didn't say. I'm assuming that's what they mean.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily spend a lot of time on the actual light modifier that I'm using. I more care about how diffuse is that light. And the way that you can diffuse that light is you can have inner baffles, okay, which basically are translucent. They let some of the light through, but I'm using my cell phone again. So they let the light through, but they're just softening the light. Okay, you can see that. That's how a diffusion panel works. And this is the inner baffle of a reflector, basically. So let's pretend this is your sun, okay? So that would be a good way. If there aren't any clouds in the sky and you don't have the luxury of finding a covered space that you can use, that would be one way to do it. Just create your own clouds, create your own diffused light. It doesn't really necessarily matter if I'm using a parabolic umbrella or if I'm using a softbox. I think more about how diffused is the light going to be. So that's kind of what I care about more.
Very interesting, thank you. What do you think is the best place to get backdrops for outdoor sessions, that are portable, that don't wrinkle? So in situations where you don't have a great natural scene or background behind you, do you ever use backdrops outdoors, and where do you get them?
I would rather just find so when I'm shooting outdoors, I don't necessarily use additional backgrounds. The only time that I actually shot outdoors with a background was during the pandemic, during COVID-19, when we took our indoor studio and we packed it all up and we placed it in the parking lot. And we said, if you want a white background, we can make it happen outdoors in a place that's more, that has a lot of airflow and you're not going to be put in any type of danger during your headshot session. That was the only time we actually took backgrounds outdoors. What I would suggest instead is investing in a lens that has a very long focal length, a prime lens. And there are a couple at different price points that are really good. The 85-1.8 for, well, I'm speaking for Canon. That's a good lens, but then the lens that I call my moneymaker is the 135 prime f2. And the reason why I say it's actually more important than a background is because it creates a lot of bokeh effect and you can get those beautiful backgrounds. So let me share my screen just once more. And let's go and let's look at these backgrounds that I shot. And you can see how blurry that background is. Okay, that's what I like. That's what I like when it comes to the backgrounds of my images. So it doesn't necessarily matter where you are. All that really matters is, is the lens that you're using and the focal length. So if you have like a 70-200, for example, just make sure you are zoomed all the way in at 200 and then move yourself back and step backwards. And that's going to get you the nice blurry look to that background.
Okay, I think we can keep going for now. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so the one that I want to work on today is this image. And so there are a couple of things that we need to change. So I started in my library module, and you can see that I'm in library because I've got the little books up here. I've tapped on the little books icon up at the top. And so then I'm going to go ahead and just tap on the first image of Blair here. And you can see here that we have a couple different options on the right-hand side. We've got an option for our basic modifications, and then we have light and the color area and effects. And these are all global modifications. And I'm actually not going to talk about those as much today because I think they've been covered a lot. What I want to start off by doing is talking about the spot adjustments. And that's going to be the healing brush, but also you have the option to choose clone as well as heal in this area. And the way you can access it quickly is just by tapping on your little Band-Aid, okay? So like I said, you have the option for heal and clone. You also have the opportunity to change the size of the heal and also how much feather that heal is going to have. So I'm going to use 2 fingers and I'm going to zoom in, and we're just going to get rid of just a few very minor blemishes to remove. So we've got one right up here. And then as you draw the area that you want to remove, you're going to get a suggestion from Lightroom as to what to fix that area with. And you can either accept what Lightroom suggests as the heal area, or you can also click and take your finger and move it around and actually tell Lightroom where you want it to be. The next one that I want to remove is this tiny little guy over here. And then I'm just going to click and drag and move that over there. But I can see that, you know what, this is too big. My circle of the area that I'm trying to heal is way too big. So what can I do? You can tap and hold, and that's going to bring up some options for you for the heals. So let's go ahead and hit delete for that one. And then let's change the size of our heal to be much smaller. And then we'll go ahead and just go over that area just a bit. There we go. So we were able to remove just that one. I don't know what that thing was, but it was just something in the background. So we've got another little blemish right on the lips there. So I'm going to just tap that as well. But again, here, what I want to do is I want to actually rotate. I want to move around where Lightroom is pulling the information from for the heal. And I think that that's a little bit of a better location. And then we have 1 or 2 more. We've got one tiny one down here on the neck. And then there's just one little hair here that I'd like to remove. But you can see there that Lightroom didn't necessarily guess the best place. So what I would like to do is just click and drag it to a better location that's just going to help Lightroom a little bit more. And I like that location for that little area. So the only thing left to do for these spot removals is going to be a little bit of this line right here. So we can go ahead and get rid of that line there and then choose where we want to remove it. But we don't want to remove it all the way at 100% opacity, right? We want to actually bring down the opacity so that the line under the eye is softened, but it's not completely removed all the way. And then I'll do the same thing for this eye over here. And that has just helped us out a little bit more. And that also has a custom opacity. The real benefit of all of these minor adjustments and blemish removal tools is that each one of them can have the custom opacity applied to it, which is a huge game changer. And if you were going to do the same thing in Photoshop, it would require you to have different custom layers for each of those opacities. And that's not what we want. We want to make our editing easier, and we want to make it more functional. So to have the ability to change and tap on each one of these removals and then change the opacity is a huge deal. And I really love that. So now that we're done with the areas there, we can go ahead and press done. And then if we tap on and off, you'll be able to see what was completed in the blemish removal step. So can you guys see the before and the after? Okay, so big changes, looks good. I'm ready to move on. And at this point, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go straight to a global adjustment. We're gonna click into our effects, and we're gonna choose to add some dehaze. As you can see from this image, the rim light that I had illuminating the side of Blair's face was a little bit turned to camera, and that's why I have the lens flare. So what we can do is we can increase the dehaze to about 47, and that makes a significant difference in our image, okay? One of the things, I mean, it does so many great things. That's why I love starting with this slider. It's incredibly intuitive. But there are a few problems that I see that I want to, that I just basically want to address. But before we do that, let's add just a little bit of vignette to make it really nice and dramatic, this shot. Love it, love what we're dealing with. I love the coloring on his face, but I feel like the area here, right there on the neck, is just a little bit too highly saturated yellow. And I also think that the area right here on his shirt, you can see that, that area is a little bit too highly saturated with blue. So those are the two things that I want to change, but I don't want to make global adjustments for this. I would just like to make those local adjustments. So what we can do is we can come out of our basic panel, and we can come down to the little circle with the dashed line around it. And that's going to be for our selective adjustments. And the way we handle selective adjustments is the first thing we need to do is start with the blue plus sign right up here. All right. And so we're going to start by tapping on that blue plus sign, and it gives us a couple options. Do you want to do a brush, a radial, or a linear gradient? So for this, we're going to start with the brush, and then we have a few options come over on the left side here. Okay, hold on, I got to delete this guy because remove brush. Okay, so we're going to start with the brush, and then here we have the size of the brush. That's the first little modification we have. Next, we have the feather, the amount of feather that is applied to our brush. And then we also have the visibility of our mask, which I'll get to in just a moment. Or the flow, I'm sorry. Move brush. I'm going to zoom into that neck area. And now I'm just going to start painting. And you can see where you're painting, thankfully, because we have the red mask overlay. And so now I'm just going to decrease my flow a little bit, which will have the amount of redness coming out of the brush just lowered just a bit. But that mask looks pretty good for, you know, for government work, right? We're in Washington, D.C. It's close enough for government work. Now we need to make the changes to this local adjustment area. And the changes that we want to make are going to be to come over into the color, and we're going to choose to cool off that area, okay, just a little bit. So we're going to decrease the temperature to neutralize that yellow tonality. And then the other thing is we're just going to decrease also the saturation in that area. So that's pretty good for the neck area. I think it looks much better than before. Now we need to add a new adjustment, and that adjustment I need to cover this area of the shirt here that's a little bit too blue. So we're going to take a brush and we're going to kind of paint in this area where the shirt is a little bit too blue. And I'm just using my finger here, guys, but if you have an Apple Pencil or a stylus or anything like that, that would be really beneficial to have while working on a tablet as well. And then all of a sudden, you don't need a Wacom tablet because you've got the image, you've got the screen, and you have everything right in front of you. Anyway, so for this selective adjustment, I want to do a little bit of a different thing. I want to actually make this area a little bit more warm in tonality. But then I also want to decrease some of the saturation in this shirt. Now I can go ahead down in the bottom and press done. And so if I tap on and off of what we've been able to do thus far, you can see we were able to get rid of the blemishes. We were able to get rid of some of the under eye area. And then also fix all of the haze in the image, and also make some color adjustments as well. The last thing that I want to do, because I know we are running short on time and I do want to get to questions, is I need to darken this jacket just a bit because it's pulling my attention away from his face. And I want to do that by using another selective adjustment. But this time we're going to use the radial adjustment, which is the circle with the line around it. And I'm just going to click and drag to create my circle. And one new little icon over here comes up, and that's the this or that. I like to call it the this or that. It says, do you want the upcoming adjustment to be applied to the outside of the radial, the circular adjustment, or do you want it to be applied to the inside? And the way we know that is because the adjustment is going to be applied to the area that is red. So we want this adjustment to be applied to the outside, okay? And then I'm just going to make this a little bit larger of a circle and move it just a little bit up to his face. And then I'm just going to add a custom, I call this a custom vignette, but it's basically just darkening all the areas other than his face. All right? Then we can go ahead and press done, and that darkens the jacket just slightly so it doesn't pull my eye away from the final headshot. And okay, I'm going to try and sneak one more tip in that I think is important. So we're going to go back to selective adjustment, and we've got our circular selective adjustment there. So we've already created this awesome circle that's already serving a purpose, right? But what if we wanted to just sharpen the face that we're working on? If we tap and hold on that circular adjustment, we can choose to duplicate our radial gradient, and we can bring it in a little bit. And we can choose that we want the upcoming adjustment to only apply to the face. And so we need to use our this or that. We need to use our this or that icon over here, this guy. But then this is darkening the face. We don't necessarily want that. We want to double click the exposure word to bring it back to baseline, and that should zero it out. But we do want to add some sharpening. So let's close our light panel and let's open up our detail panel, and we'll choose to sharpen. So once you've made one adjustment, now we can press done. Once you've made one adjustment area, you can easily duplicate that radial gradient and then apply something else to it. And, you know, and then you have this really easy way of creating this great shot. So the before and the after, the before and the after. So once we're happy with it, let's go ahead and choose the little box up at the top, and we'll choose export, and we'll export this to our camera roll. which is going to save it to our device. And there we go. So now it has been exported successfully. And so I think that that's a pretty good before and after example, just with a couple of sliders and working all on a device. So that's what I've got. Do we have any questions for the Lightroom portion?
No Lightroom questions. We have some other questions, so maybe we could do those at the end. I love how you took a portrait headshot in pretty imperfect conditions. You guys maybe remember that this was in a parking garage. And look at it, and you would never know. It's fabulous. Thank you for showing it.
Of course, happy to. So what kind of questions do we have? Because that is the end of the 45, because I wanted to be right on time. And so all the rest of the time I can devote to questions.
Perfect.
Should I come back to my camera?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, I think you can go back to video.
I gotta figure out how to do that. Okay, screen sharing. Stop share. Okay, there I am.
Someone asked, and you covered it, I think, early on, but it's worth a refresh. Shooting an open shade, is that what you do?
Yeah. When I have to, yes. But most of the time I'm looking for the soft directional light. And so that doesn't necessarily mean open shade, because open shade, you're not necessarily sure where the main light source is coming from, right? The light source could be up here coming back, and then you would need to rotate them around so that the main light source is actually hitting them on the face the way that I like to. The fact that I like to put people in a doorway or in a parking garage, there's a reason why I'm doing that. And the reason is so that I know exactly the direction that the light is hitting them. And then I can modify and tweak the lighting from there.
Perfect. Another question came in on whether you use a zoom lens. And I did think you discussed how, on your Canon zoom, you zoom it to that spot that you're happy with, or you zoom with your feet. Maybe walk through that one more time.
Sure. Yes. So when you have a telephoto lens that actually zooms, you want to be at the largest focal length that lens allows you. And so if you have a 70 to 200, you would want to take that lens all the way into 200, and then you, as the photographer, you move back. Okay? And that's going to create a lot of compression in your image, and that's really going to help create a fabulous headshot.
Next question, do you have a list of all your gear? Or maybe you can outline that list verbally of what some of your go-tos are.
Yeah, my moneymaker lens is the 135 prime lens from Canon f2. I love it. Let's see, what are my go-tos? Well, let me show you the light that's lighting me right now. I guess that's kind of important. I use, sorry guys, give me one moment. I use Stella Pro lights when I want constant lighting. And these are really great. And the other reason why I like using them, they are super bright. The other reason why I like using them is that you can actually brighten or darken the amount of light coming out at them. Okay, let's turn that off. And this allows you to actually shoot at higher shutter speeds because it's a constant light. And so you don't need to worry about your strobe syncing up with your shutter speed. So that's a big plus that I like. And then I always have some sort of diffusion panel with me, like we showed in the beginning photos. One of my things is I use whatever ambient light as my primary light source or as my key light source. And then what I do is I fill in the shadows, and I fill in the shadows to however much I feel I need to, but this is how I fill in the shadows. Okay, so it's just basically a scrim and a light behind it. And so that, honestly, that's sometimes all you need for a good headshot. That's it. A good lens and something to fill in the shadows in the headshot, or in the, like the shadows that are cast from the key light. Invest in education. That's really where you're going to improve as a photographer. It's not getting the next camera. It's not getting the latest lens. It's investing in your knowledge of how you work, for sure, hands down.
So I have a couple of questions while we wait for some of our guests to chime in. My first question is, it sounds like from your presentation that the two most important things are pose, like get the person in a pose that's really brings out the best of the features the way they want to, right? You had some great examples of that, and learning to play with light. Did I capture that correctly? Are those the two biggies?
Yeah. Yeah. And remember, and also, yeah, that's it. Don't be afraid of,
sorry, go ahead.
Don't be afraid of bouncing light off of things. Like if you've got a wall here and the side of the face is shadowed and you want to brighten up those shadows, instead of taking that light source and pointing it right at your subject, bounce it off a light, off the wall. Do you know what I mean? Like just getting creative with those lighting, with your lighting, I think is going to really help you just improve leaps and bounds. It's not about the gear. Like I said, it's sometimes good headshots can be done, you know, like I said, if I show you the time-lapse videos in the parking garage, I didn't even have any reflector on the bottom because the ground was doing it for me already. So I didn't really need it, you know? So learning those things. And I think whenever a client comes in, this is interesting, it's kind of related, but might be a little bit of a tangent moment. But whenever a client comes in and they email me before the session and they say, I really like this background. Like I want this exact background. I really like what it does. And I like the lights in it. I already know that I'm going to have an interesting session with this person, and I'm going to have to sit them down and I'm going to have to say that the background of your image is sometimes the least important thing in the headshot session, and devoting so much time to getting that exact background is going to take away from what we're trying to do in this headshot session. And that's get a great expression, get a great face, and have fun and get shots that you love. It's really less about the background. And 9 times out of 10, if we spend all of our time trying to get the exact same look as the background that they want, they end up disappointed. And so that's a conversation that I've had a couple of times in my 15 years of shooting faces.
Interesting. Yeah, so what they're really saying is I love this photo, and they're mentally focused on the background when there's a whole lot more to it than just the background that they may be bringing up. About how much time, what's your range of how long it takes you to edit a headshot?
It depends on how big the headshot is going to be. If it's a theater headshot and people are going to be printing it out at 8x10, or you know, on like a movie poster or something like that, then you spend a little bit more time on it. So I would say an hour. If it's for LinkedIn and it's only ever going to be seen on screen and it's only going to be this big, like, you know, on the side of somebody, you know, somebody's thing, then you can spend 15, 20 minutes on it. And there are some really good AI programs out there that are starting to incorporate in the AI technology, just like Adobe Sensei. And everything is getting really smart. So the editing times are actually going down and down and down, which is great for photographers out there.
A question was, someone asked, Donna asked the question about focal length. And I think you talked about the 135 prime being your go-to, or using the 200 and walking yourself backwards, which is, you're probably getting to almost 135. You're just doing it by creating the distance with your feet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. When it comes to focal lengths and faces, people need to keep in mind that wider lenses tend to distort things in the middle of the image. And so if your nose is in the middle of the image and you're photographing somebody with a wide angle lens, what that's going to do is it's going to bulge the area in the middle of the image. So my rule is I don't photograph a face with anything wider than a 50 millimeter. I think if you do, you're going to end up with distortion in the facial features of your person in the photograph, and it's not going to end up looking like them.
Interesting. What f-stop do you find yourself most frequently shooting with, or does that vary based on your conditions?
The f-stop that I'm usually at is somewhere between 2.8 and 3.2 on my 135 prime. I shoot with a very shallow depth of field. So sometimes what's in focus is actually only this much, you know? This much is in focus and everything else is out of focus. So personally, that is what I'm shooting at. I wouldn't recommend that for anybody beginning unless they've really actually taken the time to, some people will lay a ruler out like this, and then they'll take their camera and they'll try and actually focus on the different numbers on that ruler. You really have to work on your focus, and that's definitely a skill. The other thing that I'll say when it comes to camera settings is that if you are going to be using a longer lens, you need to take into consideration the amount of shake that is going to happen, because as the lens gets more and more zoomed out, you're going to have the shake of your hand is going to be exacerbated. And so usually my suggestion to people is, if I'm photographing with a 50 millimeter lens, I don't shoot at a shutter speed that's slower than 1/100th of a second. So if I'm shooting with a 135, I'm going to double that 135 number. So what is that, 270? Yeah. So I won't shoot slower than 1/270th, even though I know that that's not actually a shutter speed, 1/270th of a second. And so that allows you to decrease the amount of shake that you have and motion blur in your images.
That's a great tip. Thank you. Last couple questions from the audience, and then I have one more. Do you focus on eye or ear, number one? And number two, are you using autofocus or are you focusing manual all the time?
I focus on the eye, and I focus on an area of the eye that has the most contrast. If this is my depth of field and I focus on the ear, my eyes are actually going to be out of focus. So that's something to keep in mind, especially if you're shooting with a lower aperture or a wider open aperture, which is a shallower depth of field. It's so complicated and confusing because a wider aperture actually means a shorter depth of field. Ugh. Super complicated. What I tend to do is I actually set my camera so that my focus button is this star button on the back of my camera. And I do that through my custom settings. And then when I take a photo, all it's doing is actually capturing the image. It's not actually focusing anything when I hit the shutter. So by doing back button focus, it allows you to have one finger on just focusing and another finger on just shooting. And that helps you, especially if you're trying to focus and then reframe your image and put the person in the right place. That helps a lot.
Great tips. And then my last question, and we're wrapping up, we're just a little bit over, is, sometimes you have the opportunity to take a great shot of a person with only your phone. You don't have a big camera with you. How do you apply some of these same tips when you only have that camera that's in your pocket or your purse?
Yeah. Well, I know that this seems kind of strange, but when people take selfies, they put their camera up here. They do that for a reason. They take the camera and they take it up high, and they do that for a reason. It's because the same rules of the lens apply no matter what your lens is. You don't take a selfie from down here, right, back at you. That looks terrible. We've all done it. We all know that looks terrible. So just keep that in mind, that you want to be above your subjects, just slightly. Sometimes you want to ask them to sit up super straight. The more uncomfortable they feel, the better they're going to look. Sometimes rotating the body a little bit also helps, because again, it changes the relationship between the size of the body and the size of the head, and then leaning in. That's immediately going to make such a huge difference. And this is just a computer screen, right? Or computer, like, little video camera. So, instead of going from this to this, it's much more pleasing. So some of those posing tips, they're still the same. If you're using your camera, stay away from direct sunlight, like always. Go into a shaded area, and then you'll end up with a better photo, with a better phone photo as well.
Great. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us today and sharing all of your tips on doing headshots, from everything from shooting to light to camera to editing. It's been just an educational hour. Yeah, it's been a lot. You guys, you can rewatch this at the same link anytime. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Christina. And everyone have a great rest of their week. Bye-bye.